Hey guys, and welcome back to ScarletSprites. Today's video is a little different. Hopefully this is still interesting to the usual crowd, but it's also meant to help answer a question that I get asked at least a few times a year. How do you fix an arcade machine's marquee light? So from now on, I'm just going to shamelessly link people to this video, but really this is something that is pretty simple, and I would think almost anyone can do with some very basic tools. Ah yes, the lit marquee. This is, or was, your machine's advertising billboard to the arcade floor. It was something that announced its presence and allowed you to know that a certain game was available and waiting to be played. A lot of these feature really cool artwork or designs and look great when lit. But that's an ongoing issue these days, and I see a lot of people with machines who haven't bothered to get that gorgeous artwork lit up and glowing at home. Instead, it just looks dark and sad, and you know you want to fix it. Fortunately, it's both easy and cheap to do so. So my disclaimer here is that not all machines are the same. Things will almost certainly look different inside of your machine than what today's example looks like. But if you think about what it is we're doing here, you can apply the same principles to your cabinet. So I take no responsibility for damage incurred to your machine, and this is by no means the only way to fix your marquee light. So with that said, let's get started. There are a few things you will need as you tackle this. Again, your situation may vary slightly, but let's get the big one that all of this hinges on out of the way first. This is your replacement light. This is a T8 integrated LED tube light that is 2 feet in length. I have used these in all of my machines that have needed a light, including the Japanese Sega Astro City. These can be had on eBay for about $13 shipped and can be sourced from overseas, even cheaper if you're willing to wait for them. They come with the wiring you need as well as metal mounting brackets, which you may or may not be able to use depending on your setup. Some other things you're going to need are a screwdriver, maybe a hex depending on your machine, cutters, wire strippers, wire nuts, and possibly command strips. Don't underestimate the power of command strips. These have served me well in a variety of situations. Alright, so here's today's subject. It's that new Midway Blitz 99 arcade machine that I picked up. As you can see, it's looking a little sad having no lit marquee. This not only robs the machine of some of its personality, but it can also affect resale value if your machine looks like a project to the wrong buyer. The first thing you need to do is make sure your game is turned off and is unplugged. Safety first here. Don't go digging around inside your machine with it powered up. Next, get up on a ladder or chair. You're going to need to undo the bracket on top of your machine that is holding the marquee in place. In my case, I had to get out my hex and undo each of these screws. You may want to keep a hand on your marquee or plexi when you undo the final screw so that you don't accidentally have all of this slide forward and smash onto the floor. Once you've removed all the screws, you should be able to lift off your marquee and unveil your non-working light. So obviously my intent here is to replace this entire setup, and that may be overkill in some cases. If you want to start small, you could simply try replacing the CFL bulb. Perhaps it's just burned out, or the proverbial fuse here. Now I can tell you I have had cases where replacing both of these solved nothing for me, and I simply wasted money on new bulbs and fuses. And that's one of the primary reasons I just don't deal with this anymore. The other reason I'm not a fan of these is that they tend to give off heat and yellow the marquees. Case in point, look at today's example fully removed. You can see the discoloration on the back of this. This is really unfortunate. If you have a marquee that is in nice condition, I'd argue that you shouldn't risk ruining it over time, but obviously that choice is yours to make. Back to the task at hand, maybe the most important piece of information today, you will have 2 or 3 wires going to your light housing. A black wire that is hot, a white which is neutral, and possibly a green ground wire. On my setup, you can see all three of these feed to a Molex connector and are what is providing power to my original light. We need to steal these connections. So in my case, I'm going to disconnect the Molex and then use my cutters to clip these three wires. I'll put the Molex back on the housing, so if in the future another owner wants to strip this and rewire using the original lighting setup, they can. Nothing here that we're doing is irreversible. Now I'm going to take my wire strippers and strip each of those three wires that I just clipped. And this is really the meat of this exercise. You're just taking the cabinet's existing wires for lighting and reusing them for your new LED tube. So we'll strip white, black, and the green. Now we'll take the wiring piece for your new LED tube and connect it to the cabinet wires you just stripped. I'll start with the black hot wire and twist it around one of the white wire leads from the LED wiring. It doesn't matter which white lead you choose, there are two of them and either one of them will work. So just twist the two ends together and then place your wire nut on top and twist that on to help hold the connection and hide the bare wiring. Next, you'll repeat the same process for the white neutral wire from your machine. Just twist white to the other white and then use a wire nut again. Finally, if you have a green ground wire, you'll take that and twist it together with the yellow striped lead. So the white wire with the yellow stripe is the ground connection for your new LED tube. As I mentioned before, you may not have this green wire in your setup. If you look at my Dynamo HS5 that I just grabbed, you can see I only have the black and white wires going into the light housing. So your setup may vary. You may only have your hot and neutral to deal with. All right, your new light is now essentially wired up, but before we get too ambitious, let's plug the machine back in and make sure that this lights up before we get ahead of ourselves. And yes, we are good. We have a nice and bright glow happening, so we are ready to mount the light and put everything back together. Now, depending on your setup, you may actually be able to use the clips that came with your new LED tube and mount them in place to hold it. In some cases, you'll also have wood available that these can screw right into, and then you can clip your new LED right in and be done. Since there are so many variations of cabinets, there are many ways you could go about mounting this light. I'll show you one today, but you may need to get creative based on your own setup. So in today's case, I'm going low tech and making use of the command strips that I showed earlier. I just kind of held the new LED tube against the old mount to see about where it should go. I wanted to give the wiring on the left plenty of clearance. I then took a Sharpie and marked about where on the new LED tube I needed to place my command strips. So I got my command strips stuck onto my new LED, I exposed the sticky on top and then just pressed my new LED tube right up and onto the old housing. Most command strips, I believe, hold at least 15 pounds, so you're more than covered. But if it makes you feel better, you can go ahead and buy the heavyweight industrial strength ones. I've personally never had an issue with these, but do whatever makes you feel comfortable. So now that this is all wired up, mounted, looking good, we tested it, we know it works, go ahead and put your Marquee back in its slot and screw your bracket back into place. Now you can plug your game back in and power back on and admire your arcade machine with a nicely lit Marquee. I will note you can definitely see the yellowing on this Marquee now that it's fully lit. It's a bit of a shame, but that's why I think I'd encourage people to go the LED route as opposed to messing with the CFLs, fuses, and old ballasts. It's just sometimes a real headache, and even when you get it right, there's potential to ruin Translight Marquees. Again though, purists will want to try and preserve as much of the original machine as possible, so if you want to mess with swapping parts on an old housing and not go full replacement, that is certainly a valid way to go. But as you saw, when I put the LED tube in, I preserved the original stuff that's in the machine so a future owner could always revert back to the original setup if they wanted to. So I hope this was helpful for some of you today. For the low cost of about $13 or less, you can easily get your Marquee up and lit again. I've done this more than a few times on machines in my own lineup, including with a larger 4-foot tube here on Daytona. This looks pretty great. The LED tubes do come in different color temps. I prefer the bluish color because I think it makes the colors on the Marquees look more natural, but certainly warm is another way to go and will be more reminiscent of the hues being given off in an older arcade. This is purely personal preference. So hopefully everything was covered here today as far as Marquee lighting goes. I'll be pointing some of you to this video in the future. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And join. You can join now too. How about that? I will catch you all next time. Later, guys.